As we all know, our planet has, much like Keanu Reeves, been getting hotter and hotter every year. Except the Earth's glow up has been less cool and more global crises. But thank God the corporate world has come up with a remedy for this. ESG. ESG stands for Environmental, Social and Governance, and it advocates claim that by encouraging companies to disclose this information, good corporate behaviour is incentivised because it is rewarded with higher value. Therefore, a plethora of ESG frameworks to certify companies have sprouted all over the corporate world like a weird fungus, none of them being issued by a public body. These vague and often inconsistent ESG frameworks rate companies on vastly different criteria. And companies can claim high ESG scores even though they're far from being actually sustainable. Criteria can involve stuff like how many of their employees cycle to work every day, or that companies can claim high ESG scores by reporting on employee satisfaction through surveys or very trivial well-being programs, while completely ignoring larger systemic issues, worker exploitation or unsafe working conditions. Or how companies can claim to be powered by 100% renewable energy by purchasing renewable energy certificates, called RECs, even though they still completely rely on fossil fuel generated electricity for actual operations. The whole point of ESG advocates claiming that it's good is that investors would rather want to invest in good companies. Investors can be institutional investors like pension funds or even private investors like you and me. So let's go and take a quick look together at an ESG certified fund by BlackRock and what companies it considers as deserving of an environmental, social and governance certificate. Oh, fun! Amazon is the fourth biggest part of it. Oh, lovely. ExxonMobil, the American oil and gas giant, is in it too. Oh, as well as McDonald's. If you've watched my channel before, you know that I used to work as a consultant until I realised it's sort of a scammy profession sometimes. So I quit and now I've been making videos about the consulting industry. And there are many, many scams. And of course, they're also all in when it comes to this whole ESG clown show, with every major consultancy offering ESG consulting services. So, welcome to yet another one of my corporate scam videos. A video series that started exploring the scams of the consulting industry, but has now sort of evolved to like more corporate scams in general. But don't worry, there's still loads of consulting in this whole ESG thing. I just don't want to solely blame this ESG stuff on them, as I think it's a multi-stakeholder scam, as you'll see throughout this video. To lay a good foundation of our understanding of ESG, I'm afraid it is absolutely essential we take a quick look at the history of the sustainability movement, because obviously it's not all bad. I mean, it roots in a very, very important point, that is save humanity from the climate catastrophe. But yeah, I promise the history part is going to be really quick and you'll have a better understanding of this whole sustainability regulation topic, and we'll go into the funny scam bits right after. The year was 1713, so a little more than 300 years ago, Hans Carl von Carlowitz, a German forest scientist, published his book Silvicultura Economica, which advocated for forest conservation. He was concerned that more trees were being chopped down than actually were growing back, so his book talked about logging in a sustainable manner. This was the first documented word of the use sustainability. Well, he used the German word, which is Nachhaltigkeit, and this is widely regarded as the foundation for modern concepts of sustainability. So the years went on, and in 1983, when people were getting a little concerned with the climate getting warmer and warmer, the UN published its Brundtland Report, which popularized the term sustainable development as we're using it today. Another important figure for the realization that climate change exists was Godwin Olu Patrick Obazi. Professor Obazi's research in his 19 years of service at the World Meteorological Association, WMO, is what led to the biggest breakthroughs in our understanding of why the planet is getting hotter and hotter every year, and also what the role of human activity is in that process. his collaborative work, together with the then leader of the UN Environmental Programme, is what led to the founding of the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, in 1988. The goal of the IPCC was to bring together climate scientists from all around the world, and the IPCC published their first report in 1990. Ever since then, the IPCC has regularly released reports about knowledge on climate change, its causes, potential impacts, and humanity's response options. The UN has also organised many conferences on this topic. These conferences of the parties were established under the 1994 UN Framework on Climate Change, UNFCCC. The first COP was held in 1995 in Berlin. COPs have become critical platforms for international climate change diplomacy, and key milestones include COP21 in 2015, where the Paris Agreement was adopted to limit global warming, though the progress has been quite slow. And spoiler alert, consultants do play a role in that. So with all of this starting in the 90s, it's safe to say we've known about climate change and the looming climate catastrophe for quite a while. A catastrophe that will mostly be felt by countries in the global south, while most of the emissions have been produced by countries in the global north. There have been numerous movements like the Fridays for Future movement to scientists rallying together to finally make policymakers aware of this pressing issue. And most people agree with scientists that climate change is real and man-made, and we as humanity need to start acting. In a recent paper, Madalina Vlanescu and colleagues surveyed 59,000 people across 63 countries, and the belief in climate change was at 86%. So most of humanity agrees this is a big problem we need to address. If so many of us agree on this topic, why are we still relying on fossil fuels? And why is the planet still getting hotter and hotter every year? Consulting and ESG. There are obviously losers in the climate crisis, but there are also some winners to all of this. Our favourite profession, consulting, is again at the forefront of all of this, scamming people into thinking that they're actually helping the cause, while they're actually not really doing anything, or in some cases, even harming climate change mitigation. Here's how. While climate change consulting has been sort of a niche market, it has been massively growing. While the global climate change market was valued at more than $6 billion in 2022, it is projected to touch more than $11 billion in 2032. They are suddenly claiming that they're all about helping mitigate climate change, offering services like adaptation policy or corporate climate risk strategies, and developing metrics for all kinds of stuff that could remotely be related to climate change. In the UK, more than 10% of UK aid for climate change development projects designed to support international poverty reduction by helping developing countries adapt to climate change went to consultants since 2011, which amounts to more than £875 million. Consultancy's investment into sustainability practice and marketing efforts. Consultancies have been heavily investing into their sustainability practices, making all kinds of marketing efforts. They're posting articles and fancy videos on their websites where they make bold claims about being very committed experts to climate change mitigation, and that they're extremely concerned with the green transformation. LinkedIn is littered with partners of consulting firms talking about their commitment to sustainability and how their consultancy can help their clients become more sustainable. Funnily enough, they simultaneously advise the biggest coal, oil and gas companies on how to become more profitable. The hypocrisy is overwhelming. But consultants pretending to be something, in this case climate experts, that they're not, isn't really newsworthy, nor is it the biggest part of this problem. One of the big parts of this problem is how consultancies have been getting their foot in the door with governments and have weaseled their way into helping draft climate change policies. One example of this is Boston Consulting Group's involvement in COP26. Remember the conferences of the parties by the UN that we were talking about a second ago? BCG was also the exclusive consulting partner for COP27. We're also a partner at COP28 and will also be a partner at this year's COP29, which will be taking place really soon. The consulting company's prominent involvement into the UN's annual conferences on climate change attests for the very deep involvement of consultancies in climate change policy. And it's not only BCG. PwC and McKinsey were also a COP28 partner, and Deloitte proudly writes on their website that they too will be a part of COP29 this year, and they're setting up the Deloitte Pavilion in the Green Zone, whatever the Green Zone is. These UN conferences, so they're largely paid for by taxpayer money, have in the past years been littered with promises of innovative strategies and sustainable solutions. Yet the irony of involving these firms with extremely deep ties to the fossil fuel industry shouldn't be lost on anyone. Because at the end of the day, what these companies care most about is the bottom line of their most profitable clients, and that is their fossil fuel clients. An ex-consultant at McKinsey witnessed this personally, and his tale is told in the book When McKinsey Comes to Town. He had joined the consulting company after completing his MBA and a Masters of Science in Environmental Change and Management at Oxford University to combat global warming. McKinsey loves to write on their recruiting pages and in fact all over their website that people who work there engage in meaningful work and get to contribute on climate change mitigation efforts. The consultant I'm talking about soon discovered this wasn't the case. Despite McKinsey's website being covered in buzzwords, the environmental work he got to do was extremely scarce. The Melbourne office, out of which he worked, had politically influential coal mining giants as their clients, who McKinsey proudly helped become more profitable. The consultant raised concern with its superiors about the inconsistency between McKinsey's public commitments about reducing carbon emissions and its ongoing work with coal companies. In response, he was told, if we don't work with coal clients, Boston Consulting Group will. Soon after, the consultant's career at McKinsey came to an end, and this is where it gets really epic. In mid-July 2019, the consultant sent a farewell email that would soon be infamous, circulating throughout McKinsey's offices worldwide. His message went far beyond the typical farewell. My short time at the firm, he wrote, has shown me how much impact McKinsey can achieve in a short amount of time. I'm immensely proud of having played a very small part in that. However, creating impact is not an absolute good. And doing good work, he added, doesn't equate to doing good. I believe it's time for McKinsey to take precedent-setting action around client selection. As an organization, McKinsey seems to talk a lot about values and principles without taking a valued or principled stand for much of anything. In my mind, McKinsey is an amoral institution. He said McKinsey regularly took on clients who brought harm to others. There are many cases where I believe this causes detriment to society, McKinsey's reputation, and the planet. He went on to write that there is a commonly used phrase for hypercritical eco-marketing used to make a business or product appear more sustainable than it actually is. Greenwashing. Honestly, we need more people like him who stand up for the right values and act according with what they actually think. So I encourage each and every one of you to speak your mind, because that's the only way we'll be able to stop all this bullshitting. McKinsey counts at least 17 mining and fossil fuel companies among its biggest clients. Collectively, those clients earned McKinsey hundreds of millions of dollars in recent years, according to internal records. Since 2010, McKinsey has worked for at least 43 of the 100 companies that have pumped the most carbon dioxide into the atmosphere since 1965, based on a list of polluters compiled by the Climate Accountability Institute. The world's biggest polluter, Saudi Aramco, has been a McKinsey client since 1970. Number 3 on the list is Chevron, which generated at least $50 million for McKinsey in 2019 alone. Other top McKinsey fossil fuel clients include ExxonMobil, BP, Royal Dutch Shell, and Qatar Petroleum. And no, McKinsey's focus of work when advising these firms is definitely not making them more sustainable. It's about making them more profitable because that's what they're getting paid to do. They work on projects called Upstream Oil and Gas Digital Roadmap for Chevron, or projects named Coal Processing Optimization at the Green Hills mine, or Drill and Blast for Tech Resources, North America's coal mining giant. A company paying millions in fees to McKinsey every year. As a former McKinsey consultant put it, McKinsey is capable of doing good work, helping clients navigate the energy transition. But that work pales in comparison to what it's doing for oil and gas. They serve the world's largest polluters, he argued. The firm is best understood as possibly the most powerful oil and gas consulting firm on the planet, posturing as a sustainability firm, advising polluting clients on any opportunity to preserve the status quo. So it is, to say the least, astonishing that McKinsey was a key advisor at COP28 last year. COP28 was hosted by the United Arab Emirates, with the talks being presided over by none other than Sultan Al Jaber, the head of the Emirates state oil firm ADNOC. And who would have guessed what happened? Multiple sources and internal documents have shown that McKinsey was using its position as key advisor at COP28 to push the interests of its big oil and gas companies, undermining efforts to end the use of fossil fuels driving global warming. Surprise, surprise. Who would have guessed that a firm relying on the consulting fees of the biggest fossil fuel companies, from Chevron and BP to power firm Drax to mining giant Rio Tinto, would act in the interests of its biggest clients? McKinsey will also be a part of this year's COP29, as they're proudly outlining on their website that they're bringing global leaders together at COP and are participating in discussions that will focus on how to implement ambitious climate commitments while leading a wave of innovation and economic growth that safeguards our planet and advances sustainability. If it's going to be anything like the last couple of years, it's going to be ambiguous climate commitments at best. And yay! McKinsey's COP29 delegation features Vishal Agrawal, who apparently leads McKinsey's sustainability work in Asia now, but who, according to this book, won his promotion to senior partner by helping coal mines to thrive. The Global McKinsey Energy and Materials team honoured him with a graphic that appeared to riff off the Outlander television series. Agarwal was the outstander. Vishal the Great, the story of the leader that turns GEM Industries in Indonesia into the champions that take on the world, it read. In the background of the graphic, eating into a mountainside, an open pit mine. So I guess it only makes sense to make him part of the delegation for COP29. Anyways, I don't only want to point at McKinsey. BCG, Bain & Company, KPMG, Deloitte, EY and PwC all bid for the same contracts at fossil fuel companies while painting themselves as sustainable. For example, Boston Consulting Group brag on their website that BCG's upstream consulting team ensures sustainable growth for clients in the face of an increasingly complex industry. The meaning of the words upstream in the oil and gas sector refers to identifying, extracting, or producing oil and gas. I don't know if they have trouble understanding the meaning of the words or how this has got lost in translation, but they're kind of contradictory concepts. And it's not only that they're slowing action to advance climate change mitigation. Consultancies have, for example, also helped Isabel dos Santos, the daughter of the Angolan president, take over the Angolan state oil company, helping her divert money into her private accounts. While the population of Angola, a country that, despite its wealth in natural resources, has one of the highest poverty rates in the world. A New York Times article recounts that Boston Consulting Group, McKinsey, and PwC, as their accounting company, helped make this scam possible. But I'm getting sidetracked here. Let's get back to how consulting companies are profiting off climate change. Because it is obviously quite unsettling that the consulting partners for the most important climate summit, where climate strategies and policies are developed, incorporate these consultancies with clear profit-driven interests, and who have time and time again proved that profit is the most important to them. Just go watch my other videos about the opioid crisis. While the consultancies claim that they bring climate change expertise to the table and help cop out with pro bono work, there's usually no such thing as a free lunch in consulting. And it's also not like these firms are the only ones who have climate change expertise. I would go so far as to argue that there's a plethora of people who know more about climate change mitigation as these consultants who usually are just like fresh out of uni graduates and the partners who have before worked for the oil and gas companies. I would argue that actual climate researchers that have spent their careers at universities teaching and researching climate change have more knowledge than the consultants. Universities are full of professors with decade-long experience in the research of climate change and mitigation, yet governments like Australia, as you'll see in a second, keep going back to consulting firms for policy advice on climate change, even though these consultancies are charging hefty fees for it, while most climate change professors employed at state-owned universities would probably do it for free and would probably be honoured to help work out a climate change strategy for their country. I mean, that's kind of what they're doing in their day-to-day research anyways. Okay, so let's take a look at what went down in Australia in 2021, when the Australian government hired McKinsey to write their climate change strategy to reach net zero till 2050. For context, and I find it pretty interesting, Australia is the 14th largest emitter of CO2 and has one of the highest CO2 emissions per capita. Australians even emit more CO2 than US citizens. As Mazzucato and Collington have put it in their book, Australia's actions, or lack thereof, will be consequential for our collective ability to save the planet. So, facing some pressure to introduce some serious climate change policy, Australia's government decided to hire McKinsey for $6 million Australian dollars in 2021 to write a report on how to achieve net zero by 2050. According to this book, this was the outcome. Upon its launch, the report was met with widespread criticism that transcended borders and party lines, as analysts reviewing the models discovered that the government's plan wouldn't achieve the net zero target by 2050 that the government itself had agreed to. The Shadow Climate Change Minister described the report as a scamphlet on net zero. And can we please let the marvellous word scamphlet sink in? Because I think it perfectly describes almost all the PowerPoint slide decks I've ever seen in consulting. Anyways, the leader of the Greens declared it a recipe for climate collapse in Australia. According to the modelling, the plan would fall 215 metric tons short of reaching only an 85% reduction in emissions by 2050. The remaining 15% reduction in emissions would be achieved through further technology breakthroughs emerging from some unspecified place in the world at some unspecified point in time before 2050. A whopping 10 to 20% of the reduction would come from offsets, achieved through a variety of questionable methods. And these carbon offsets are just the next scummy thing I want to talk to you about. First of all, let's get the definitions out of the way, so we all understand what carbon offsets are. Whenever we book a flight or a train or whatever, there is often a little box that can be ticked at the bottom that will tell you something about offsetting your emissions, so you're flying carbon neutral. When you click that, the aviation or train company or whatever will usually buy a carbon offset certificate. But it's not just when flying. These can also be bought by industrial production companies, or as a matter of fact, by any company wanting to lower their CO2 emissions. When buying a carbon offset certificate, the company you buy the certificate from will invest in a project that reduces or removes CO2 from the atmosphere. And it can, for example, be achieved by preventing deforestation and buying up forests that are about to be chopped down, so they basically rescue them. At least this is how it works in theory. In practice, it's a pretty wobbly concept, as an investigative report by the German newspaper Die Zeit, the UK newspaper The Guardian, and source material showed in 2023. Their analysis of nearly 100 million carbon credits found that only a fraction of them resulted in real emission reductions, which led to companies making false claims and convincing customers they can fly guilt-free. Cambridge researchers estimated how much deforestation had actually been prevented in the first 5 years of these projects. They found that while the projects claimed to cover forests the size of Italy, they had only protected an area about the size of Venice. Using a formula shared by the scientists, source material and its partners found that the projects had exaggerated and avoided deforestation by an average of 406%. Only 6 of the 32 had not overstated their effectiveness. I hope this is not too technical and you're still with me, but I think it was really important to explain the basics of carbon offsets because consultants had actually quite a bit of involvement in that as well. Here's how. In 2007, the UNFCCC contracted McKinsey to develop a metric for estimating the financial value of maintaining, conserving, and managing forests as a source of carbon capture compared to other uses of the land. This was part of their REDD Plus program, which led to the scandal I just talked about. But not only that, McKinsey's approach was based on a so-called marginal abatement curve, a method commonly used by governments to assess the cost effectiveness of different climate change strategies. The goal was to help governments reduce deforestation at the lowest possible cost. Using the MAC tool, McKinsey recommended curbing deforestation by targeting slash and burn agriculture practiced by the indigenous communities, which was considered to offer low financial returns, at least lower financial returns than logging companies, for example. Consequently, these communities were seen as requiring less compensation for their land, in contrast to large timber companies who were seen as needing higher compensation, as the financial costs of halting logging activities were deemed more significant. However, logging companies were the main contributors to deforestation, and not the indigenous communities who had been there for centuries. McKinsey's metric placed far greater value on the profits of the logging companies than on the cultural farming practices of indigenous communities. Also, a very important fact to note is that McKinsey's clients at the time included logging companies operating in the forests targeted by this scheme, while the indigenous communities affected from Brazil to Bangladesh and Papua New Guinea had no direct access to McKinsey consultants and were not amongst the firm's clients. As a result, the quantitative tool McKinsey had developed prioritized the interests of their lucrative clients over more effective methods of reducing deforestation. And as always, this just shows again how consultancies are playing both sides, the regulator and the regulated, while society is paying the price. Ever since the 2023 scandal about most of the voluntary carbon credit schemes being super sketchy and exaggerating their impact on climate change mitigation, there has been more talks about regulating and auditing them properly. And they are a topic that will be discussed at this year's COP29. We can only hope that the consultants won't take part in these discussions, but unfortunately that does seem quite unlikely. I will follow the discussions and have decided to make an entire video about carbon credits, as well as take a closer look at some private sector ESG reporting standards that are adopted by public bodies. For example, the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board or the Global Reporting Initiative, GRI. Interestingly enough, in 2021, the G7 group of nations and the EU central banks endorsed a framework developed by the Task Force on Climate-Related Disclosures, TCFD, to force banks and companies to disclose their exposure to climate-related risks. Members of the task force include partners from Deloitte, EY, PwC, and KPMG. In the same year, all of the Big Four and many other smaller consultancies launched services offering advice to companies that are being forced to comply with the TCFD framework. So again, shaping regulations while helping the regulated. Remember the ESG fund we looked at in the beginning? The one with McDonald's in it? It's an iShares fund. BlackRock is the biggest asset manager in the world. It is headed by Larry Fink, quite a big proponent of ESG. In 2021, Tarek Fancy, BlackRock's then Chief of Sustainable Investing, made headlines when he quit his job and publicly called ESG frameworks a dangerous distraction that isn't really doing anything in regards to real-world environmental and social impact. I'll take a closer look at all of this, so make sure to subscribe so you don't miss that video. Also, hit the like button while you're at it and leave a comment with your thoughts on ESG. See you next time. Bye.